So our next module is about incidents and cyber ethics. And this is where things get really interesting, because what we're going to be diving into are practical scenarios that you're going to encounter after you finish this course, and perhaps while you finish this course. One of your colleagues earlier today willingly shared of their own volition, without coercion or influence, that they were the recipients of a phishing attack over the weekend. Is that correct? That is correct. So, and this is a common phenomena for many students at UVI, especially occasionally we get these really weird, crazy email messages that say, hey, you need to click this to reset your password, or there's a problem with your account, or your email inbox is too full, or hey, I have $1 jillion for you if you just help, right? In this case, the phishing attack was a recruiting expedition. So the intent, is it okay if I talk about this, Chidao? So the intent of his particular incident had to do with an appeal to make lots of cheddar, lots of money. It was weekly, right?
Yep.
How much was it?
3.5K weekly.
$3,500 weekly to just do a couple of things, right? And what they're looking for are people who can be duped into doing some simple tasks at first, and then once you get used to the wealth and money and you get hooked on that, because I don't know, you've paid off credit cards and you've bought a new flat screen TV, and you know, life is good. Oh, you can qualify for that new car payment now. What happens is that once you get hooked, then the game changes, okay? And then you're kind of stuck. It's usually good if they find a way to incriminate you without you knowing it. I'm telling you this up front because I love all of you. I just want you to know that you know, somebody asked me, how do I like working as faculty at UVI? And I said, I love my students. They're thirsty, they're interested, they want to know more. And I said, and we get to hack stuff. What? You know, there's no downside to that, right? I want to tell you that usually what happens is that people don't just wake up, and I want to share this with you, an incident. Here's the beginning of an incident. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I think I'm going to be stupid enough to fall for an extortion exploit. Nobody does that. They just see an opportunity to make some extra money. And they hear that, you know, they have a friend. This is where it gets really bad. They hook somebody that you know. True story, in the Garden of Eden, Satan told Eve, you will not die. God is not being straight with you. And then she took a bite of the apple. And her eyes were opened, and the fruit tasted good. And the first thing she did, you know, for years I used to think, what, was Adam stupid or something? I mean, why would he? I mean, okay, so maybe the serpent was really beguiling and managed to talk, you know, Eve into doing this. But what would have happened if the roles had been reversed? I'm absolutely convinced that no male on the planet can blame the Eves of this world for the original sin where the first bite of the apple was taken by a female instead of a male. If the roles had been reversed, I know for a fact it would have been the same outcome. Because here's what happened. It doesn't say in the scripture, what was the conversation that happened between Adam and Eve after she took the bite? I want you to put yourselves in their shoes. This is about, and why are we talking about that? Cyber ethics. So incidents are chock full of ethical dilemmas. And here's the challenge. As you begin your exploration of cybersecurity and hacking, when you experience your own incidents, you're going to have some ethical decisions to negotiate. And in the Garden of Adam and Eve, with Adam and Eve, At one point, Adam's like, I can just imagine his first words. It's like, what are you, nuts? You took a bite out of that apple? You heard what God said? I mean, it's been nice knowing you, but shoot, Eve, what were you thinking? And then all she'd have to do is smile and say, I'm still breathing, Adam. I'm not dead. And the serpent said, God wasn't being straight with us. And here I am talking to you. And I know things you don't, because I have the knowledge of good and evil. I've been blessed with the fruit of this tree, and I see stuff that we didn't know before. And man, you got to check this out. Well, what do you think would happen next? Right? It's a trust issue. Trust. When the incident hits, you have to know who you can trust. You have to know what's cool and not cool. And those are the essentials. Now, I spent a lot of time telling you risk management was overcomplicated. And then at the very end, I showed you a few formulas and I said, I want you to be familiar with these formulas, what they stand for, how they work. Basically, you know, you have a cost of an event, and then there's a cost of the countermeasure, and there's this thing called return on investment, right? Right? It's cost benefit analysis, CBA, cost benefit analysis, right? How do you speak in language terms that a money guy can understand? You don't do this, guaranteed cost you 100 grand by the end of the year. You don't like that? You don't want to do this thing where we buy a $1,500 fix? You sign right here that you're willing to risk the 100,000 for the 1,500. And it's nice knowing you, man. Nice knowing you. That's risk management in a nutshell. I just summarized risk management for you as you get ready to take on your first attempt of the module 2 assessment, right? Now, what about this? Cyber incidents. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the concepts and ideas take shape and manifest in live, active exchanges. And there are ethical issues. So, as we look at our outcomes, right? One of the things I want to do is take the day to introduce you to the leading topics that we're going to cover for our 3rd module. And what you'll see here, the need for a formal contingency planning program. Now, this sounds a lot like management speak all over again. Contingency planning is what happens when, not if, what happens when my disk fails. How many of you have witnessed firsthand, and let's just take a second, okay? I want everybody to turn up your chat. Everybody get into chat right now, okay? And let's make sure we got everybody on the screen, right? So we got all 7, all right? So what I want you to do is in chat, I want you to answer openly, have you experienced personally a hosed system, meaning unusable, after an unexpected change, or a failed hard drive? If yes, indicate which. Please. Okay, everybody with me? So this is what I'm showing on my screen right now. I'll show it in the window so that you can see it also. So what I want you to do is just respond to, let's just take a moment here. Tell me one or the other or both. Say, yes, host system, not a hard drive failure. Respond to both of those prospects, right? Now I could be dramatic here and I could reach into my toolbox and I could pull out a hammer and I could walk over and I could say, so let me show you what a contingency plan is all about in real life. Okay? Is your laptop? No, let me hold this. Wow. All right. So I just walked over to one of the students sitting in the St. Troy class And I said, okay, let's make contingency planning live in color, right? And that's what we're talking about. Now, never mind the ethical part of that, you know. Hey, I'm doing you a favor. No. All right. Let's look at what our responses show, right? So do we have some responses? I have 2 responses. Okay, yes, failed hard drive, a hosed system. No, I haven't experienced either of those to my knowledge. I'm not going to ask you which platform you use, so I don't want anybody else envious. But no for both for Jadel. How many responses have we got so far? 1, 2, 3, 4. I need 2 more responses. Simeon and Joshua, please. Have you experienced? Okay, not that I know of, Simeon. Thank you. All right. So basically, contingency, you're going to learn all about the spare tire in the car, because sooner or later you're going to have a flat tire. If nobody's ever pulled you aside and said, here's contingency 101 with driving a car, get out right now, right here, change the tire. And usually what happens is either one of my sons start throwing things at me. They're like, no, I have stuff to do. And I'm like, this never hits at a good time. If you want to know what this is like, you got to be able to do this. You got to be willing to do this anytime it happens, wherever it happens. And they're like, really? By the side of the road? I'm like, that's where it's going to happen. By the side of the road. Yeah, I mean, when do you expect you're going to get a flat tire, right? I mean, it might be flat when you come out from the movie theater and you have a nice air-conditioned washroom to wash your hands after you do your, it's not likely to happen, right? Just saying. So, and we have to ask ourselves, is it ethical to deny ourselves the experience of a contingency plan in real life, right? The business impact analysis. Now, this is related to, but not technically, and there are some risk management programs that talk about the business impact analysis, right? A contingency plan as the initial effort of all right, so the business impact analysis, what you want to do is you want to identify those things that would impact your business the most. Now, this sounds like risk management, doesn't it? It is. It's related to risk management, and it's the business end of risk management in incident handling. What do you need to be most prepared to handle as an incident? I would have never guessed that ransomware was something I would have to handle in my own house on my own campus before I got here. And I would have never guessed that the chief financial officer at my former post, I'm not mentioning the name of my former post nor the name of my chief financial officer previous, right? But received an email message, seemed very authentic, click, boom, that's all she wrote. Fortunately, there were some things that we had done when we configured the system in an Active Directory domain with restrictive, granular privileges, permissions, and inheritance. So when the ransomware tried to break out and take over the fort, it could only go as far as her documents. That's it. That's all we lost. And we had a backup from the night before, and she did this 2 hours into the morning, so she lost about 90 minutes worth of productivity. It was a joke when we got the ransom note. Send $50,000 in Bitcoin to the following address, or you'll never see your financials again. And I basically replied with, why don't you suck it? We've already planned for this contingency and try again. You know, it was like, okay. And by that time, everybody on the campus knew what had happened, right? So business impact analysis sounds like, and it is an extension of risk management, but it's okay, how do we prepare to manage the incident, handle the incident that we believe is going to happen? You just finished telling somebody in the previous module, oh, within a year, this is going to happen. It's going to cost you $100,000. You remember this, right? Okay. So when we get into this module, we're talking about, okay, what do we do when it happens? What's the first thing we do? What are the essentials of incident handling? Now, a part of incident handling is the first of several steps that have been endorsed and are now full-blown certification and qualifications internationally. What am I saying? 20 years ago, we didn't have cyber credentials. Well, all right, we had a few, but not very many, okay? Now there's all sorts of different cybersecurity qualifications or credentials, certifications, right? 10 years ago, we didn't have this field that had to do with incident handling, disaster recovery, and business continuity or enterprise continuity. You can now get a certification in disaster recovery and enterprise continuity, and it can be internationally certified, right? You need to know that up front, if you don't have certain things in place, everybody see my screen, yeah? Digital forensic investigations are a lot harder if you don't have certain things up front. Did you know that systems can log almost anything? Did you know most often they are not turned on? The logs are not turned on. They are not active. Except for certain things, they are not active, right? What does that mean? If you want to do some digital forensics and be effective, you need to turn the dial now so that when the incident happens, you can handle it. Does that make sense? Define the components of crisis management, including an EOC to scale, Emergency Operations Center. So we just had a DNS failure that took out browsing and interactive work on our UVI screens. That's what happened just prior to the start of this class today. For some reason, the DNS just wasn't there anymore and we couldn't find anything. I was in the middle of a Blackboard screen and I clicked and it just froze. And then I closed the browsers and tried to get back in and I couldn't find anything, right? The moment I changed my DNS down here to an alternate DNS setting inside my Bucks Wi-Fi and I manually used something, I figured there was enough cached DNS record out on the internet with those DNS servers, someone else's DNS servers, where we could still find mycampus.uvi.edu. But when I'm connected to Bucks Wi-Fi, what happens is that I'm pinned intentionally to the UVI DNS servers. If something happens with those UVI DNS servers where for some reason they go offline, like maybe there's an update and they reboot in the middle of the school day. That's why everybody loses their internet connectivity. And they're into Office 365 and they click the next link to do the next task and it can't find anything. That's because the DNS has been derailed, right? Let's pretend that all of our DNS died because of a massive attack. True story, 18 months before it hit, I predicted a global DNS meltdown. I said, you watch, this is going to be ugly. Now, I wasn't the only one. There were a couple of others among our League of Ordinary Cyber Gentlemen. There's like a movie of League of Extraordinary, never mind, it's an old story. Anyway, back then I said, this is an Achilles heel. If somebody wants to disrupt the entire world, all they have to do is take down a handful of machines and everybody's a sitting duck. And I said it 18 months, and I said it at a conference with federal employees at the National Research Laboratories of the United States of America. I'm talking about Lawrence Livermore National Labs, Sandia National Labs, Los Alamos National Labs, right? These are places where they do really Star Wars kind of research, right? And they were all smiling at me and they're like, yeah, we've heard that. I'm like, okay, well, 18 months later it hit. It all went bye-bye. You have to be able to manage sometimes if it's catastrophic, like after Hurricane Irma and Maria, what do you do if there's no data center? You have to have an emergency operations center. In other words, in the worst case scenarios, when it comes to incidents, when we're talking about business continuity, after a major hurricane or a natural disaster, what's the first step to getting your stuff back? What do you worry about first? Getting power to the Wi-Fi units? Well, what are the Wi-Fi units connected to on the back end for them to work? Where do you start, right? You have to have this idea of where to start, and can you stage equipment that you would use to power what, do you have a solar capability that you can take out of a hardened box? It's stored in a watertight storage facility, right? And after the worst happens, you roll the cartons out, you open it up, you set up your solar panels, you start powering some batteries of one type or another. Those batteries in turn run the Wi-Fi points, right? Which keeps the little blinky fiber optic. How many watts does it take to keep an LED fiber optic link alive? About 20 watts. Less than a light bulb. Why the hell don't we have data and power after a disaster? Can somebody tell me? I'm just saying, right? Just saying. Now, that means you have to have somebody who's willing to say, okay, we're going to set up a box that's waterproof, that we're going to put these things in there. And what have you done beforehand? I don't know. You've taken them out and tested them and tried to connect them yourself while things are good. And you can take a shower after a long afternoon. If you haven't done the crisis management drill, right? So you have to perform and you have to prepare, but then you perform them and then you refine them. What I'm telling you is, has anyone ever heard of an emergency disaster drill where the first responders pretend that a jet crashed at an airport? Have you ever seen that in the news? You're kidding me, right? So they do this in the States all the time. They do. They say, okay, a 737 just lost its landing gear and it tanked on the runway out here at Rolson. Quick, how do we mobilize? Where do we put these? We have burn victims, we have triage, we have life-threatening things, we have lesser. How do we handle the sudden surge? The word surge is important. There's often a surge in demand and corresponding capacity after a bad thing happens, and you have to know how to have all that in place, right? So they've never done anything like that where it's a disaster mock-up? Really? For the entire island or for UVI? Yes, and they did have a couple of years ago, they had a first-person shooter drill that we walked through. Active shooter, yeah, not first-person shooter. I'm sorry, that's the gaming thing that just hit. Yes, thank you for that correction. Active shooter drill, right? Where the campus security said, okay, here's what we do, here's how we work it. Will you participate with your classes? And I was like, oh yeah. I mean, because if somebody's going to get an AK-47 out here and start shooting it up, I want to know what's expected of me and where I'm supposed to be, right? Yeah. Now, the first instinct is to go and just hit the, just go, right? Now, let's talk about that, right? Is it unethical for you to preserve your own life? I'm just asking a question. Is it ethical for you to protect your own data at the expense of everyone else's data? Okay, it gets a little sticky. What happens if somebody's hacking you and they're outside the territorial jurisdiction? Like they're from the British Virgin Islands. Do we have anybody in our, do we have any students in our group right now who are from like St. Kitts and Nevis? Am I saying that right? You're from where? Dominica. Okay. Well, thank you. I was going to say, do we have anybody from Down Island, right?
I was raised in Antigua.
Right. Antigua? Right. So what happens if the incident crosses international boundaries? What happens? Those are, how do you handle that, right? How do you deal with that? You find out, oh, wait a minute, this is coming from Antigua. Those are the topics we're going to engage in this module, right? So we're going to talk about, okay, how do you handle an incident effectively? And then how do you do it ethically so that you don't get into trouble or things don't get worse legally, right? There are laws, relevant laws, regulations, and professional standards for cybersecurity. Did you know that if something happens here on campus, we are obligated to report it? There is something called the Clary Act. This is just put on our banner in the My Campus portal. Every institution is required to report the number of violent crimes that occur on their campus annually to the world, to make that report available to all students, all parents, everybody. Why? Because there was a time when some universities had a bad problem with it. They didn't tell the parents, and then the students, their children enrolled, and then they died. I'm not making this up. So there became a federal law. That's how the federal law came about, right? Now I'm oversimplifying here, obviously, but the point is that if institutions are transparent about their safety on the campus, they're not afraid to share the statistics. And it's relevant to understand, okay, so here's the amount of violent crimes we have on campus. How does that compare to the community around us, right? So that's another dynamic that's important to assess when you're trying to make decisions, right? Are there any international laws and federal laws that influence the practice of cybersecurity? Do you have the right to digitally operate forensic tools if your system is down and your productivity is at stake? What boundaries do you have before you start digging into other people's junk? Now, again, this module doesn't seem like it's that exciting, but to me, this is like where part of the rubber meets the road, right? When we show you how to do digital forensics, we're going to put you in a scenario where you have to pretend somebody is disgruntled and bad, and you're going to go in there and you're going to collect evidence, and you have to know how to do it ethically, or you get fired. In our case, you get a 0 for the assignment and the solution, okay? If you miss the first step and you don't do it ethically, we'll talk about what that means, right? Look at this one right here, the role of privacy in cyber law and ethics. What happens if somebody is, you know, we're using forensic tools and then we discover something like, I don't know, bootleg movies or child pornography, or yeah, that's a big one. Child pornography is a game stopper. Essentially, if you are using digital forensics tools anywhere, internationally, anywhere, I don't care if it's United States or any country, they all have laws about this pretty much. Well, I'll take that back. There are a couple of countries where I would never want any of my younger family members to ever visit, but that's another conversation for another time. Yeah, because it's like considered acceptable for kids to be exploited. It's a short list. There aren't very many, thankfully, countries that are, you know, permissive when it comes to things like human trafficking and child exploitation and child pornography and that kind of thing. But in any case, if you encounter something like this, guess who gets to go to jail if you don't report it? You do. If law enforcement discovers that child pornography and they find out that in your work in cybersecurity, you ran across this and you turned it over to somebody's supervisor and they're like, oh, well, just turn it over to their supervisor. You're like, you're on drugs. I'm not turning it over to their supervisor. Somebody's wearing prison orange, okay? Somebody is going to jail and it's not me and it's not you. We're reporting this to the law enforcement because the only thing that's going to happen if we don't report it is that you and I are both going to wear prison orange. We've seen this. We cannot unsee this. You cannot go back from this. And if you do not report it to the law enforcement on the spot at that time, never mind, oh, let me pray about it. Let me think about it. No, pick up the phone, call 911 and get somebody there right there. You don't do it, you go to jail for a long time. Let me tell you what happens when you go to jail. somebody goes, hey, see that guy over there? See that girl over there? Something about child pornography, and they were party to it and didn't say nothing and blah, blah, blah. Prison populations are very unfriendly when it comes to child molesters or child pornographers. It does not end well. That's just the reality of what we're dealing with here, right? So does it help to know some of the absolutes? Oh yeah, that's one of them. And we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on that, but we are going to show you how to detect some telltale signs you might want to rope in law enforcement. Like if you're helping somebody with their system and you see this certain pattern on the screen. Now, there are cases where an individual doesn't know that their system is being used by a neighbor, a friend, a family member to hide. One of the things that these criminals are very good at is hiding their tracks and framing somebody else, framing some other hapless person, right? Yeah. Exactly. So that's where getting law enforcement agencies involved, right? You need to know who to call and how to deal with it, right? And then we want you to utilize incident handling best practices and respond to a system incident. We're going to give you some system incidents. And in this module, we're going to have some assignments and a solution where you have to get in there and you have to try to put yourself in the shoes of a first responder to an incident. And then what do I do? What's the next step? There's going to be some curveballs. I'm not going to tell you everything. So that's part of the reason why I think this module in particular is it's where things really get interesting, right? All right. So what I'm going to do now is bring our class to a close because I want to give you time to get on screen, refresh the trail, engage your final attempt at the module 1 assessment, get your other one done. Yes, we had a question. So the question was raised, are you required to take the retake? And the short answer is no, but the retake assessments, the final assessments for a module are like a preview of your midterm and final exam. So if you don't take it, you're not as read in on what to expect for the midterm and the final exam, okay? What happens if you get a lower score on the retake? It gets dropped. I keep whatever higher score is highest. You know, if your first attempt was higher than your retake, no problem. But I would recommend getting the retake in place before we have our exams. It was a good question. Thank you for asking that, Ms. Lanaya. Any other questions from folks offline or on St. Thomas?
When will we ever be put, so like similar to how we're going to put in the shoes of the person, will we be put on the opposite side? As in the shoes of the intruder.
Well, I'm working, so the question was, are we ever going to be in the place where we're on the bad guy's side? I'm working on something for the final module, kind of like a capstone where you get to try to hack each other. And I'm thinking that might be a fun way to finish up the last module of the course. We have, to date, we haven't done that, but we do that in system security. So, all right. Okay, well, good luck with your final attempt of the assessment and your first attempt of the module 2 assessment. And we'll see you for incident handling on Wednesday. Have a good week.
I have a question. I have 2 Kali Linux